Welcome to the Learner Center Collaborative Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Martin, and so excited to have a conversation today with Dr. Jill Siler. Dr. Siler served as a superintendent in Gunner ISD for nearly 10 years and now serves as Deputy Executive Director for Professional Learning for the Texas Association of School Administrators, TASA. She's also the author of Thrive Through Five. In the first months of the superintendent, Jill faced financial crisis along with many other challenges that leadership brings. Her school went then on to be named as the TASA Honor Board as one of the top 5 school boards in the state, and one of her campuses was named as a 2017 National Blue Ribbon School. Jill also served as the chair of the Future Ready Superintendent Leadership Network design team, where innovative leaders across Texas gather to learn, share, and grow together. She has a passion for helping others to reach their goals, and that's why I'm so excited to have her here today to talk about her work and what she's learning. So welcome, Jill.
Hey, thank you, Katie. It is great to be with you on your podcast.
So I always like to start with just getting to know a little bit about your journey. So I'd love for you to share some of the key moments that have brought you through your leadership journey and have led to where you are today.
Well, great. So I have been in Texas for over 25 years, but I grew up in upstate New York. So Rochester and Buffalo, went to the University of Pittsburgh and went to the University of Texas for graduate school, originally not for anything in education, but right before I went, I worked a summer camp and I was teaching and coaching high school girls and totally fell in love. So started my teaching career first as a paraprofessional and then as a classroom teacher, went on to be a campus leader and a district leader for many years, and then had the great privilege to serve as superintendent for almost 10 years in a small district in North Texas. And then lately have been working for the Texas Association of School Administrators, leading the learning for leaders across the state of Texas. And it's been such an incredible honor.
I love that. As you talked about being a coach, I'm like, of course you were a coach, right? Some of the best educators are really exceptional coaches.
Absolutely. And I loved my experience coaching. And I think you're right. Some of the best teaching happens in those moments. They're some of our greatest models. So, yeah, I love that.
I was meeting with my daughter's principal yesterday and my son also, and we were just talking about, he was like, "Tell me your experience." And I was like, "The coaches have been amazing. They're bringing the
Mhm.
kids in and lifting them up." And I always love when I see those practices translate to the classroom as well.
Absolutely.
So you wrote Thrive Through the Five, practice truths that powerfully lead through challenging times when you were a superintendent. So what does that mean for someone who hasn't read the book yet? Like, what does it mean to thrive through the five?
So I tell people all the time, like, I love what I do. And that has been true since I started in this profession. Whether I was a classroom teacher or an assistant principal or leading as superintendent, I love the work that we get to do and how we get to impact kids and support teachers and lead and foster this culture in our communities. But I also know that as much as I love this work, the work is really hard. And there's this small portion, although we can debate on how small it is, especially in today's day and age. But there's a small portion, let's just call it 5%, that's really, really difficult. Whether it's the tragedy that happens in your community that's so unexpected and just brings out so much devastation and loss. Whether it's the poor choice that our young people are making, that are not so young people are making, whatever that looks like, it's the social media. It's trying to design meaningful teaching and learning in this world of AI. There are so many pieces of this work that we do that are hard. But I also know that I love this work. So my mission was, how do we do more than just survive? Because the times that are difficult are lasting longer and coming more frequently than they ever have before. So how do we be, brutally realistic about the facts that are in front of us, but also keep people in this amazing profession doing incredible things for kids? So how do we thrive through that?
I love that. And I like when you said you really just want to do more than survive. And I think that applies to so much more than even the
Mhm.
profession of education is we want all of our young people as they navigate their path to thrive in life and not just feel like they have to survive. So,
Absolutely. And I think part of that is just recentering how we approach certain things, right? So I talk a lot in my book about how do we lean in and learn from failure or missteps or lost opportunities. And then not only that, but from the leader's perspective or even the teacher in the classroom's perspective, how do we handle it when others around us are not meeting expectations? And how do we have those really hard conversations that maintain the relationship, but also support the person in the way that they are needed to have that support look like? And then also get them to where they need to be. So, what does that look like around failure? How do we act in the midst of fear, right? That angst that we might get on that Sunday before going into the work week, the angst we feel when we walk into a really hard conversation with a parent or with a student, even sometimes. And how do we really just walk through those moments and come out on the other side even stronger? How do we take care of ourselves and care for ourselves so we can be our best self, not just at work or at home, but how do we do that too? So those are some of the things that I tackle in the book.
I love it. So the one of the things early on that you mentioned, and you just said this, the difference between failure and fear. And I was
Mhm.
rereading your book as I was excited to chat with you. And you talk about failures and these things like you just mentioned, like, someone made a bad choice, or, the lesson didn't go as I wanted, or
Mm.
I, didn't give the best speech that I thought I should give. Those are kind of events that we have to get over. But then you talk about fear. And so the what was coming up for me as I'm reading this is the difference between failure and fear. Usually we get stuck in this idea of compliance and status quo, that fear of what's going to happen, and we just don't even start. And to me,
Mhm.
that's kind of the biggest failure of all.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right there. Sometimes it's the paralysis that happens. Like failure's hard, but failure happens. It's an incident, and so it's finite in nature. But fear can be ever present. It's that constant what if? Like, what if I'm not successful? What if this observation goes off the rails? What if this conversation with the parent doesn't land the way that I want it to? All of those things, and it can paralyze us to not be able to move forward, and just not be our best self. And so that's a challenge. But we have to recognize, like, I think for me, and Katie, I don't know if this is true for you too, but sometimes it's that angst, it's that doubt, that fear that paralyzes me. And I think, like, okay, well, then I must just not be equipped for this job, right? I'm a leader, I'm feeling angst, then I must not be the person for the job. But truthfully, like, if you're walking into a hard conversation with someone, like, I'm hoping that you're feeling some things because that's another human that you're going to be interacting with, and that's totally natural. That fear is there. We have to learn that that is just part of the process and not a sign that we're not perfectly equipped for this work that we're doing.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. And so, moving from, like you said, you didn't even plan to go into teaching, and then you became a teacher or a school leader. And were you totally equipped to lead in each of those roles, or how did you navigate those transitions?
No, and it's interesting too because the more you do this work, right, you're obviously getting closer and closer to the position that you're ultimately going to take in the next, phase of your life. I even joke like sometimes you're 6 feet across from the person who's going to sit in that chair, and it does not matter how close you are to that chair. When you sit in it, it is an altogether new position, and that's part of the growing process,
Mhm.
right? We can't bypass seasons of growth. We literally don't know what we don't know. And so we have to recognize that there's going to be this huge learning curve, right? And we have to rely on the experiences that we've had in the past, but also know that we're going to need more than what we had in the past to get us to be successful with where we're going. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's reaching out to people, networking, finding good mentors, asking questions, but most of all, having those trusting relationships so that we can lean on people when we need them the most.
Well, I know getting to work with you a little bit when you were in the superintendency, I know you're an amazing instructional leader, that you really get teaching and learning and understand these practices that we want to see for our young people. And I know a lot of teachers, central office leaders that say, like, oh, I just want to stay with curriculum and instruction, or I just want to be the assistant soup because that's where that's where I think that my strength is. What advice do you have to people who are really great instructional leaders who are making a real difference for young people because they're thoughtful about how we design instruction and the conditions that we create, who are afraid maybe to jump into that next role? What would you say to them?
Well, so first of all, I would say yes. And yes, we need that and we need you. I think sometimes there can be an overemphasis on, you are not successful unless you, right?
Mm.
Unless you leave the classroom and go into leadership, unless you lead the campus principalship and move into central office, unless you lead your central office position and move into the superintendency. And the truth is, like, all of us are uniquely gifted, and we have to find that right space and place where we are able to use our gifts and thrive. And for some of us, like, I'm so thankful that you are a classroom teacher. And
Yeah.
I'm so thankful that you are leading that campus. And I'm so thankful that you are thoughtful and strategic about how you're rolling out and supporting teachers and teaching and learning. And so that's what I would say, first of all, is that if you know that you are doing great things, yes, let's cheer you on. And maybe let's expand your leadership and responsibilities or whatever. But like, I am super thankful for that. But I also want to say I had a super impactful conversation once with a mentor of mine. And she was a former superintendent. I had no inclination to be a superintendent, but I saw her at a conference and was so just blown away by her leadership, by her presence. And I was like, kind of like one of those moments, like, I want to be like Jenny when I grew up. Her name was Dr. Jenny Preston. And so I went for coffee. Like, I asked her for coffee. She said yes. Like, she lived in Dallas. I lived in Austin. I drive 420 miles to have this cup of coffee, Katie. I don't even drink coffee. Anyways, we have this
That's
great
awesome.
conversation. I tell her that I want to be, an assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction because that was my love. I was an executive director at the time. And we got done with the conversation and we walked out. And she said, Jill, I know that you said that you want to stay in this realm. You want to stay in this realm of teaching and learning. She said, but I just hope that if an opportunity comes your way, that you're going to be open to it because there is a district out there who is in need of your leadership. And that's what I would say to anyone who's
Mhm.
considering, because our students need the best thoughtful and strategic and strong and authentic leaders that they possibly can have. And leaders don't look one way. I
Mhm.
think that's something that I struggled with when I went into the superintendency. My kids were 2.5 and 7, and I was female. Like, I broke that mold of what I thought, and I had tons of mentors in my life, but none of them looked like I did as a young mom with young kids. It made me question whether I could do this work, but more so, it made me question whether I should. And
Mm.
so, we have to get to this place where we recognize that leadership is leadership and it looks different and it comes in different packages. And so, just because you might not look like the exact leader that you've been working under for a while, that doesn't mean that you can't be brilliant on your own.
So true. Yeah, we have these conceptions of I have to look this way, I have to be this way, I have to have these credentials in order to lead. But I think what you said is there are people leading from many different roles. It doesn't mean you
Exactly right.
have to be the superintendent. There's leadership happening from the classroom, there, throughout the campus. We have a lot of students who are leading. So it's really important to acknowledge those pieces too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you now get to lead aspiring superintendents and superintendents in their first couple of years. What are the key lessons that you've learned through your career that you're really supporting these leaders with in their own journey?
I think as leaders are moving into these new positions, it has to be just kind of a collection of things, right? So first of all, it's support, right? There's equipping that has to be done.
Mhm.
So you're about to walk into your first superintendent evaluation. Let me talk to you about how to prepare yourself, how to prepare your board, maybe how to prepare your face as you're having a conversation with your board, whatever that looks like. There's this equipping and support and just tangible things that they need to know in order to be successful. I think it's also a whole lot of inspiration and encouragement. Like, I want to put before those leaders people who are crushing it in their work so that they know, like, yes, we're doing incredible work. You can do this. We are here, like Home Depot. We're here. You can do it. We're here to help, whatever that is. I also think sometimes it's creating a safe space so that we can talk about, you know, um, just the brutal facts of the reality, right?
The
This is
5%
job.
that may be the
That's
20%.
right. That's right. Like, let's have an honest conversation about that. But I think one of the most important things that we can do, not just equipping and inspiring and all of that, is providing a place where people can come together and deeply connect with one another. It is that network, that community that we create. And so, we do things like we have receptions and dinners at every single event to just try to bring people together in an organic way where we're not just focused on this super challenging thing that we're facing, but that we're building relationships so that the next super challenging thing that comes, they have a great place to go to get help and support.
I think people miss that a lot. That piece around connecting, the networking. We know how important it is, those relationships, but as we're busy, as there's so many things to tackle, it can often just get to like, let's come for this 2 hour meeting. Let's talk about the list of things we have to talk about and move on. And I just want to double down on what you said around building the community so that people don't necessarily have to go to you every time that there's a problem, but you're building that community where they can support one another and they can reach out and feel like they can be in a space where they're not the only one dealing with those challenges.
Absolutely. And, working for TASA, which has been such a privilege, and I've been such both a recipient of their professional learning and support that they've provided, but also a fan of how they go about this work. And I'll tell you, even as we've kind of moved in our own thinking and leading, when I first joined that organization, they were really focused on just this idea of design, right? So even going to, Phil Schlechte and the Transformation Center and the work, the difference between planning and design, right? Planning, we're focused on a product. Design, we're focused on who is it that we're serving and what are their values and beliefs. Planning, precedes design, and design, all of those pieces that we're thinking about. And just the idea of how do we design this learning around things like voice and choice and novelty and affiliation, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you, Katie, we've also really dug into Dr. Susie Wise's work at the Stanford School of Design.
Mm-hmm.
And she really talks about this idea of what you just said, which was designing specifically for belonging. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if you think about an experience in your life that was done really well, where the design was like tangibly like present. I spoke at a women's conference at a school district in Texas. They asked me to come out and do their keynote. And from the moment I walked in, every single thing was intentional. They had quotes on all of the screens that were really, really empowering and all from women about women. They were interspersed with these stories that the attendees had submitted about the woman in their life who had really impacted them and with their picture. They had affirmation stations. They had these personalized gift bags for everyone. Like everything was so intentional. And then you backtrack and you think about like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And how did they get there? And so some of the things that Susie talks about are just, what are those moments of belonging? And it's everything from, how are you invited? How do you enter a space? How do you join that group? How do you contribute to that group? How do you share when you're frustrated with the things? How do you grow? How do you make sure that your needs are met? And how do you just be in community? And then she talks about what are the things that you can design around. Everything from space to role, ritual, incentives, grouping, the time and rhythm of how we do things. And so for me, just being in this role now, that has been magic. Number one, to reflect on just the things that made me successful in the classroom, which obviously was not as maybe sophisticated as what we're thinking about and working through now, but those elements were still there too.
A lot's coming up for me as you talk about this. First, this idea of that design, the intentionality. I could just imagine this space. When you talk about the keynote in this district, really centering women and just being thoughtful about how they bring people into that space. You and I both know you do a lot of keynotes that many spaces are very different, right? And it's
Yes.
not just keynotes going in, now I'm sure in this role, you see different leaders, you see different districts. And I'm so often just really surprised, I think, about the variance that I see across
Mhm.
different districts and what people think is normal, what
Right.
people just when a culture is not intentionally designed or when the spaces are not intentionally designed and what people think is okay and what people think is the bar. And then you might go to another district or even another classroom and you see how people are interacting and engaging because the community is so intentionally designed, the difference that it can make.
It is huge. I mean, and just like from a leadership lens, when you're fostering that culture, you're being intentional in how you do that, right? Like those decisions are there, but it trickles down to the classroom. I remember my students kind of joking with me, like that they never knew what the room was going to look like when they walked in. Some days they walked in and the desks were in groups of four, and some days they walked in and all the desks were stacked up against the wall and we were on the ground together. Some days there was a huge circle. And that's just like a physical manifestation of that notion of design, right? That we're going to create an environment that is going to best suit the learning that's going to happen. It's when we're in the middle of teaching and learning and recognizing, okay, like I've been talking too long. So what's the question that I can ask that it's going to allow students to talk about what's resonating with them and share their own voice and add to the learning together? It's that intentionality that is so important. And this work that we do is super reactive because things are happening all the time. We have a lot of students in and out and all of those things, but we have to make the time on the front end to be intentional, and then on the back end to be reflective about what worked, not for the next time we do that lesson, but about the process of teaching and learning and how we make that better the next time.
Yeah, that is so on point. And you said when we first started this conversation, before we were even recording, about like really diving into the learning of the adults now. And
Yes.
it's really clear when people don't do what you just talked about, is being an intentional on the front end, just going through the motions and being reactive rather than thinking about how do I want this experience to unfold? How do I want people to feel? What are our outcomes? And not intentionally designing toward that and then reflecting on the outcome uh, leads people in very different directions. Just showing up as they've always done it isn't going to get us to the next place we want to be.
So true. So true. One of the really great things that I'm involved with our association is called the Future Ready Superintendent Leadership Network. And it's, 200, 250 or so leaders that have come together to just share best practices, learn from industry leaders, um, visit each other's campuses and learn from that. And it's been fantastic. But one of the things that's so powerful about that is that it's completely done by intentional design. So we have a design team. It's designed by and led by our leaders themselves, superintendents, assistant superintendents, small groups for every single event. So I was sharing with you before we recorded, I just got back from the El Paso area
Mhm.
and we were in a small district, about 2,900 students, San Elizario, right on the border of Mexico. And we brought over 100 leaders to their district for a couple of days. And all of those pieces, the event is completely curated around that community, but you're putting together a collection of experiences that is allowing the leaders to immerse themselves, engage in the learning the entire time. And it's just incredible to watch when you can take the time to just be intentional about how you're designing that learning. It was a great couple of days.
I can only imagine. So I want to like press on that a little bit because what you're highlighting, the network aspect, the observation of other districts, getting to see practice and have intentional conversations about that, building community, that to me is professional learning at its finest, right? When you're really getting in and doing that because you're like seeing the work, you're talking about the work and thinking about those next steps. And yet we have still so many professional organizations that are continuing to going to come do a workshop. I'm going to have a meeting and tell you what to do. That isn't again going to get us to those next steps of really shifting what is happening in our schools. So how do you get hundreds of leaders to sign up for this? Like, what's the process of getting them engaged in this work?
Well, and I would say, truthfully, we have all of it, right? So we have the major conference with 7,500 people. We had Brene Brown a couple of years ago, Simon Sinek, James Clear. So we had those large events where people come and they listen, attend breakout sessions. Like that's a part of it as well. But we also want to make sure that we're offering things that are going to meet leaders where they're at. And so this is one example. We have another example where we do a small schools network where it's very similar to what I just talked about with our Future Ready group, but specifically focused for districts that are under 1,300. So what we found from our work with networks like this, and we do a couple of others as well, is that once a leader comes and experiences it, and we do an induction before. I had 6 new districts that were in this year. And so talking with them about, so what is it that we focus on and what do we not focus on, right? We don't focus on the legislature, even though we know we're coming up in Texas to a really challenging legislative season. We don't talk about issues of compliance. Katie, we really don't focus on standardized testing. Like it is obviously a marker that we have to be mindful of, but that one-time test for a student should not be the end all be all for the kind of experience that we're trying to create for all of our students pre-K-12. And so having those districts come through, I had multiple messages that I woke up to today saying, like, that was truly life-changing, right? So to kind of like give that flavor, right? So we hosted the learning right in one of the missions in San Elizario, and the parent volunteers had come together. They handcrafted these, traditional Mexican flowers that were completely, decorating the room, agendas, personalized, journals. We had every district had their logo, and we started the day talking about what is the work that we're committed to, profound learning, authentically assessing, leading in a way that leads to organizational transformation, and then leading them through a series of questions. What are your hopes and your dreams for your community? And what are you going to commit to this network to help you try to get to that? And then placing those, logos on this lit tree that we had in the center. And then taking them through a series of activities, visiting campuses, having questions. We took the entire group to the border wall. And with the border agents, they opened it up and we talked about, how does this wall it's a physical manifestation of the barriers that our students are overcoming in this place that truly is in abject poverty. Yet we just had a series of campus visits that were unbelievable. So how do we do this? Like, how do we create this culture of high expectations everywhere? And so, I know that not every learning environment, we get to fly people out to this incredible community on the border and have this kind of learning, but also we can take those same tenets of design and design an experience that when people walk in, they know that they know that they know that there was intentional design behind it because of the music, because of what is on the table, because of the questions that are asked, because of how the day was formatted, because of how relationships are, built and fostered. And that's the key, is taking the things that came from this really special experience, but then translating them across the board to every learning opportunity that we have.
Well, and as you're talking about this experience, I know that we create what we experience, right? Like,
Mm,
so by intentionally creating that, you're not only creating a sense of belonging, allowing them to see amazing practice that now becomes a new model of what's possible in their minds, right? Life
right.
changing, like you said, but also now that this experience is part of them,
Mhm.
and they can now go back into their own communities and not mimic everything they saw, but have that intentionality, and that view of what's possible to go back to their communities. And that's what we see all the time, doing similar kind of visits and bringing people together. We get that same feedback that this was amazing and life changing, because now I've had these ideas that maybe I'm seeing something in Long Island, New York, but I can take it back to my community in Texas and actually think about the application. And to me, that is what is so powerful about bringing people together and having a shared experience or seeing different classrooms.
Mm. We talk about the importance of vision for leaders, right? They have to see further, they have to see faster than other people do. But the truth is that vision doesn't just happen. It has to be fostered. And part of that is getting yourself and the other people that you're leading with into spaces where you can see what could be. Because sometimes it's hard to see that from where we're at. But when you walk into an environment where they've had incredible challenges to overcome, and they are letting you see authentically what's happening in those learning spaces day in, day out, it allows you to form this vision that is different than what you thought before. And that changes everything.
It does. I just spent a day with Michael Folan this week,
Mhm.
and what you're talking reminds me of that vision is so important to create, but then the specificity around what we're going to do to get there
Mhm.
is so critical, because sometimes there's this gap of, we're going to change everything, even future ready. We're going to be future ready and we're going to, you know, have these amazing experiences. And then people in the system are like, but what does that look like? What does it mean?
Right.
How do I even get there? And so that's a lot of times the work of the leaders to really not only cast the vision collaboratively, but then get really clear about what are those steps and how are we going to get there together.
Absolutely. And, we try always as well to ground our work in the research. And so I want to say the book we had for this event, I'm seeing if I can find it. I want to say, is it the Four Disciplines of Execution, but it's for educators. And so we ended our work talking about, okay, so what is your one, I think they call it the wildly important goal. And then we use cafe conversations to frame this conversation of, so where do we go from here? What is an action, step? What does it look like when it's fleshed out? And then what are those action steps? And allowing teams to have time together to really talk about, okay, what is it that we want to take away? What is that going to look like? And how are we going to hold ourselves accountable to that? And I think having that time for reflection and planning and commitment at the end is part of the learning process too.
So important, right? Because you can go and be excited and you can be inspired, but we know that when you go back to your day to day, if you haven't thoughtfully put a plan together and you're not holding yourself and your team accountable, it becomes very hard to make those next steps.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was looking back at some of your writing and some of the things that you had done, and one of the things that really struck me as in this journey of Future Ready, um, speaking of managing this change, that you shared your journey towards Future Ready about envisioning, elevating, equipping, and extending. And that to me, I thought was a really lovely way of highlighting that change process. As we think about this work, it's managing and leading change, like I just said, is not always something that people are intentionally thinking about. So I would love for you to share a little bit around the journey in Gunner and kind of how you helped your system think about being future ready and some of the things that you all did to get them to move beyond, as you shared, test scores only to a
Yeah.
broader definition of success and really think about what that looks like.
So my journey in Gunner was incredible. First of all, I came into this district that was already doing incredible things. They were steeped in this culture of excellence, and you saw that play out in so many ways. So a lot of what I was doing was amplifying the great work that was happening already. But I will say, once I had been there for a couple of years, and we had some financial challenges in the beginning, and we worked through those. And I really realized that we are doing really well, in all the indicators, right? Not just standardized test scores, but in how many of our students were taking dual credit and, all of the things that you would look at, involvement in extracurriculars and excellence in all of our activities, whether it's bass fishing or whether it's football on Friday nights, all of the things across the board. And then just realize like there has to be more than what we're just doing. Like, where's the next? And I think sometimes that's a place where leaders can fall is like we're so reactive to all the things that are happening in our
Yeah.
district, which is understandable. But we have to be, again, intentional about really thinking through what could be. And that's that envision piece that you talked about. For me, as a young superintendent, the first time that I was invited to Friesland, because I was the attendee before I was the designer, the leader, the facilitator, and Friesland is the loving name, of course, for that Future Ready Superintendent Leadership Network group. And so the first time I went, of course, I'm in a district that's under 1,000 students. I'm surrounded by 125 leaders, most of which were larger school district leaders. I'm in classrooms and campuses and on districts, and I am wowed and I am overwhelmed. Because going back to what you said earlier, it's not a matter of going into a place and going, oh, I must replicate this entire thing in my district. It's about finding the value and the need and where they intersect. Like, this is an incredible practice, and this is something that we are short in and could really benefit our students or our schools. But I remember early, like that was the challenge, was that I would come away with my head spinning and just think to myself, like, there's just no way. Like there's just no way. And so part of that envisioning is like, yes, have this big vision of what could be for your students and your staff, but then to also be really thoughtful and strategic about what that looks like to move forward, because you have to have all of your people, most of your people come with you, right? Or it's not a journey. It's just a, I don't know, a solo Lone Ranger excursion. And so part of that is just being thoughtful and strategic and thinking about, okay, so what does that look like for us? Um, and I also think, we tend to think transformation, like, okay, we're going to like shoot rockets off, or we're going to, do these like transformational things. But transformation is about transforming the organization. It's about getting a clear picture of where we are in every area and making sure that every area has that same bar for excellence. And I think once an organization tastes that bit of excellence, they all want it. Like, you don't want to go back from that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and getting people excited around this shared vision and then feeling like, okay, I know my next step and I can get there. And that's such an incredibly important part of leadership is helping
Mhm.
people see where they are. And I love how you highlighted like you were just elevating what they were doing to begin with that was working, right? Continuing
That's
to
right.
celebrate and build people up. We know that no matter what role, people are working incredibly hard, sometimes at things that aren't getting us to that end
Mhm.
goal. So,
Absolutely. And, one great example of that, we had gone on a trip. It was to Clear Creek ISD, and what they were doing within their literacy and around self-guided learning and personalized learning and all of that pieces. I had my elementary principal, I had my curriculum director, and we got back and just realized, like, yes, number one, this is an area we can improve on. Yes, number two, what we just saw was brilliant practice. But also, while we have the vision, we want our teachers to come and see it.
yeah.
And we came back and organized a group of teachers, not just from our district, but for several districts that had gone, and went and allowed the teachers to see it in action, and then came back and had a great conversation. So, what does this mean for us? And what are our next steps? And then deciding together what that looks like. And it was incredible what they accomplished.
Yeah. Seeing is believing, right? If you
That's
don't have
right.
those models, and we've talked about this a lot already, but when you only know what you've done and what you've seen, and people are working really hard to do better, but if you don't have other models to inspire you or other people around you to push your ideas, we can stay stagnant, and that's not helpful in this long-term journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're coming up to the end, but I do want to talk about one important topic that you hit on a little bit. And it's kind of been a theme as we've known each other. You talked about accountability, you talked about the Future Ready Network, and you're saying we're not just focusing on that single standardized test score. But there's still this aura of accountability and rating still kind of rule the day in a lot of places. And so, how are you helping people to broaden success, whether it's in TASA and your work, to think about moving beyond that single metric? What are the things that you are really looking at beyond the standardized test score?
It's such a good question. I'll start here, which is where I just was this week, which was in this beautiful district in El Paso on the border of Texas and Mexico. And when we took this trip, and first of all, their team did such a good job of stripping this visit from anything that could be connected politically, right? Because obviously, when we talk about the wall, like, we're recording this about 2 weeks before the election, like, we want to stay as far away from any political conversation, period, right? But their team did such a good job talking about, like, this isn't political, like, this is just our life, like, this is the backyard to half of our district, right? And so, anyways, we get to this spot, and here we are, we're 100 leaders, and we're standing in front of, again, this like physical manifestation of the whole theme for our event, which was overcoming barriers. And I was so surprisingly emotional in that moment. And it really took me some time to like sift through, like what is the emotion. Obviously, it's just this representation of barriers that our kids have to overcome. But also, Katie, I think it came down to just this anger of, even the bus ride to get there was through some poverty that I had not experienced before. And then juxtaposing that with the notion that our lawmakers are making decisions in this marbled floor, beautiful building that is so very far away from the reality of what our kids are facing.
Mhm.
And the ludicrousy of having an accountability system where the poorest district and the richest district are measured in the same way, right? Like, we have to have high expectations. And 1,000%. And incredible teaching and learning is happening. But our districts are different and the needs are different. And so that's my intro to say that we need to do more to make sure that our kids are performing in the highest possible way in every single space, for every single child across our country. For TASA, we've really focused our work around this notion of community-based accountability. And how do we bring leaders together to talk about what truly is the hopes and dreams of their community? And then to set up structures, systems, and processes to set real goals and actions, and then hold ourselves accountable to that. What does in time progress monitoring look like in signaling to where we're doing well and where we need to make a change? What does authentic communication about how we're really doing as a district and amplifying the things that are great and also shining the light on the things that are not great?
Right.
And what does that look like for our districts? And most of all, how do we bring leaders together so that they can, with incredible synergy, together talk about what is the best way that we can move the teaching and learning process forward? And I think the more districts will engage in a process like that, focused on their hopes and dreams, making sure that every student is completely exceeding their potential, that's when we're going to do what we need to do as leaders.
Yeah. Yeah, when you the community-based accountability, I'm so happy to hear that you're leaning into that. And, when I talk to leaders, whether it's Kentucky, Hawaii, California, Texas, people are like, we're not afraid of accountability. We actually want to be held accountable, but
That's
we want
right.
to be held accountable to the things that our community cares about, the things that we see, and to your point, to elevate the things we were doing really well, because we know
Yeah.
there are these great bright spots and there are places that need to be addressed. But without accountability metrics that really help us shine a light on those things,
Mhm.
it's too easy to ignore the things that aren't working because we can say, we have low test scores, we're never going to get there, whatever, we're not going to pay attention to anything. Or we have high test scores, we're fine. We don't need to pay attention to how to improve. It doesn't
That's right.
really tell us a broader story about what's working and what isn't, aligned to this future ready vision, right? Aligned to this vision of how we prepare kids for our world today, not the one 100 years ago.
Oh, so true.
We could talk forever, and I have seriously 1,000 more questions about all the things that hopefully we'll get a chance to follow up on. But I'm going to end us with our rapid fire round.
Okay, so
So
just a notion, like there's no knowledge. Like sometimes I get like, hey, we're gonna finish with rapid fire, and here they are. I don't know what these are. I'm feeling a little anxious right now. Let me just tell you.
you got it. I promise you, Jill.
Okay.
You got these.
Mhm.
There's no right or wrong answer. It's just a quick what comes top of mind,
Yes.
right? What
Okay.
is one thing we should stop doing in education?
Making decisions that are disconnected to what's happening in the day in, day out classroom. If we do not have a pulse on what it is really like for the classroom teacher experience right now, we are doing ourselves a disservice. The teacher retention crisis is not going to be solved by Jeans Pass or Taco Tuesdays. It is
Thank
going to be
God.
solved when we bring people together who foster a culture that people want to be a part of, and the people who are actually doing the work day in and day out have a voice in that structure.
Yeah, I just want to double down on that. Like a jeans pass is not like, oh, great, I'm so glad I get to work for you now because you gave me a jeans pass.
Right.
Great. What is one thing we should start doing in education?
I After our conversation, it's hard to not say to double down on design and how important it is to strategically and thoughtfully plan for the learning experience, not just for our students, but for our adults as well.
Yeah. What should we keep doing?
Loving and amplifying the incredible work that our kids and our teachers are doing day in and day out.
Yeah. What is something that you're personally focusing on learning right now?
So I am in the middle of reading Ryan Holiday's Right Thing right now. And it is an incredible, if you're not familiar with Ryan Holiday for our listeners, he is a current modern day writer who also brings in the work of the ancient Stoics. And The Obstacle is the Way. I'm looking at my books right now. There's several that he's written. This is his latest. And it really talks about I mean, to be honest, being a good human. And I think that we could all, including myself, have a good dose of that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll have to pick that up. There's a lot of books you mentioned, and I'm
Yes.
like writing down my list. Um, what's something that many people don't know about you?
I was a college swimmer. Although if they've read my book, they know that. If they don't, I'm giving them a big spoiler. But I love the water and I swam in college.
Awesome. I didn't know that piece. I meant
There you
like
go.
that's I think I was like reading through it, but that's a pretty impressive feat.
Thank you.
Uh, what are you grateful for right now?
I am grateful for so many things. And can we just say that gratitude is such an important practice for all of us, especially in education. But I think after coming off of this week, spending that time with these leaders who are just doing incredible work in their districts and who are committed to overcoming obstacles day in, day out. And man, I'm sure grateful for our students and our teachers too.
Yeah. So I know we're both fans of similar authors and educators, but do you have a favorite quote or saying that guides you?
I think from the leadership lens, I often go back. I love John Maxwell, and he just keynoted our joint school board and school leader conference that we had this past fall. But one of the quotes that I love, and it's not word for word by any stretch, was is talking about intentions. I think we're seeing a theme here this week with me in this conversation with you. But it talks about that when we judge actions, like we judge people by two different standards. When we judge others, we judge them by their actions and what they do or they don't do. But when we judge ourselves, we tend to judge ourselves by intentions. And if we intended to do good, even if it didn't land good or was good, we'll kind of let ourselves get away with that. And we'll continue to do so until like we're forced to change. And so I love that. You know, one of the things that John talks about a lot is that of all the people that he's led in his, I mean, just incredible career, the hardest person that he ever leads is him, right? It's us. And I think that we have to be the champion of our own growth and learning and leadership.
Yep. I like the Gandhi, be the change you wish to see in the
Yeah.
world, right?
Mhm.
That is always like really important for me that like I can't expect someone else to do it if I'm not willing to show up or if I'm not able to show up in that way.
Yeah. Love that.
All right, last one. Your hope for the future of education.
Mm. My hope for the future of education is that we continue to have incredibly brilliant teachers who commit to the work of connecting with and inspiring and teaching our kids so that we can continue this way of life, right? Like this is literally our future. And I'm so thankful for those educators who are pouring in and doing that work.
Jill, this has been awesome. I am always inspired by you, but really value just this last hour to sit down and talk with you and learn more about your work. So thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.